Hello Zero Books readers and viewers, it's me again, Douglas Lane, and in this video I'll examine the fantasies and dreams of a prominent 20th century technocrat from a Marxist perspective. And I'll read excerpts from Fabian Scheidler's The End of the Megamachine and Alex Quicho's upcoming book Small Gods, Perspectives on the Drone, in an attempt to understand why it is that our machines always seem to turn against us.
Welcome to the world of tomorrow. Climb aboard. You are about to take a journey out of this world into the world of the future. Forget the world around you. Forget the people around you. You are entering Futurama, alone with your own thoughts. Have you ever wondered where we will find the food, clothing, and shelter we will need to sustain the world's exploding population in the years ahead? In the timeless distances of outer space, perhaps? The technology of today is already helping us penetrate the silent darkness of space. Man himself has taken the first tiny step into this vast unknown, and we can only imagine what resources will soon be brought back to Earth by these early pioneers. But what about our own Earth? Are there not still resources here to meet the needs of the world tomorrow?
The philosopher, biologist, anthropologist, and inventor Herbert Spencer was, in the 19th century, the most famous English-speaking philosopher in the world. He coined the phrase, survival of the fittest, and, as a young man, he imagined that the cosmos was a product of a benevolent God who aimed at nothing more than the perfection of humanity through the slow unwinding of history and time along the tracks laid down by natural laws. Through the process of evolution, first man the animal, and then the culture or society of man, was always progressing toward a harmonious, heterogeneous, complex system of integrated organization. A complicated man, Spencer was a critic of imperialism and militarism, even as his ideas were often used to justify scientific racism as an ideology, and even as they set up the idea of social Darwinism. In a letter to Engels, Marx characterized Spencer as a pseudo-philosopher. Quote, "If you are forced, as I am, to read the economic articles of Herbert Spencer and his ilk, you would see that they are fed up with economic trivialities, and know their readers are fed up too. So they try to give their scribbling some flavor through pseudo-philosophical or pseudo-scientific slang. The pseudo-character in no way makes the writing easy to understand. On the contrary, the trick lies in so mystifying the reader and causing him to rack his brain that he may finally be relieved to discover that these hard words are only fancy dress for commonplace assumptions."
And it's considered very left-wing and very advanced and so on and so forth. Well, some of what appears in it actually makes sense. But when you reproduce it in monosyllables, it turns out to be truism.
Despite Marx's judgment, Spencer's influence reached the 20th century through the Scottish biologist Patrick Geddes, amongst many others. Geddes coined the term neotechnic, which according to the website and dictionary Lean Logic, is a form of political economy that takes advantage of the more efficient, less labor-intensive new technologies that developed in the early 20th century. Geddes broke with the eugenics movement, and according to Alex Law, writing for the Sociological Research Journal in 2005, insisted that differences between the races should be understood as arising from differences in the cultures and in the technological development of various societies, cities, countries, and so on. Geddes was an urban planner, and he was commissioned to design the city of Tel Aviv. His aim was to plan a system that could integrate all the component parts of community life together. The hard division between urban and rural life would be eliminated as the entire region was integrated through his plan. Geddes was a liberal, He believed that rational planning within a free market economy could bring about a harmonious and vibrant community. But his student, Lewis Mumford, on the other hand, saw things differently. He saw the drive for profit-making, the dominance of production for exchange, as one of the major impediments that the progressive evolution of human society had to overcome. Mumford saw the capitalism of his day as driven by megamachines, or as a megamachine, that had an abstract and alienating character. He traced the origins of modernity back to the Middle Ages and thought that the worst of the megamachines was a bit of old tech called money. In his book, The End of the Megamachine, Fabian Scheidler explained the concept this way. In this case, machine does not mean a technical apparatus, but a form of social organization that seems to function like a machine. I expressly say seems because despite all systemic constraints, the machinery is actually made up of people. They recreate the megamachine every day, and, at least under certain conditions, also have the power to stop it. The most dominant megamachine, according to Mumford, was money, or more specifically, profit. In his book, Technics and Civilization, Mumford wrote that under capitalism, profit reigned as the main economic objective, and profit became the decisive factor in all industrial enterprise. Inventions that promised profits, industries that produced profits, were fostered. The reward of capital, if not the first claim upon productive enterprise, was at all events the dominating one. The service of the consumer and the support of workers were entirely secondary. Mumford imagined a new economic principle might set the terms for production. Rather than producing in order to develop private profits, a rationally planned economy would direct production based on the needs of the people as measured in terms of energy. And the development of efficient methods of production aimed at producing a good quality of life rather than at irrational accumulation would lead to the creation of higher levels of consciousness, more energetic and willful individuals, and the emancipation of the human race generally. The aim would be to create plenty for all. Satiated but not stuffed, humanity would live well. In an essay entitled Orders of Technics, Consideration of Lewis Mumford, Edmund Berger notes that today Mumford is most often cited by primitivists and anti-tech environmentalists. The Mumford who wrote The Myth of the Machine in 1970, who asserted that the people of the 20th century were living through a dark age and that a mechanistic monster was devouring mankind, is the one most often quoted. However, Mumford was a left-wing technocrat, a critic of the Technocracy Inc. top-down approach, implementing a new social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population. He insisted that a movement to change the fundamental values of society, a movement for the freeing up of leisure time, free activity, and creativity for all people, must be the force that would change society and break with capitalism. If you enjoy these videos, you should click on the subscribe button and click that bell. And you should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Patrons get access to our behind-the-scenes parrot room discussions, where we let our hair down, dish out gossip, or go into the weeds on topics such as the tendency of the rate of profit to decline, imperialism, and the critical theory of Bernard Morton Capel. You'll also get access to our podcasts on From Crisis to Communization, Reform and Revolution, and the history of the Russian Revolution, just as soon as I can coordinate times to record with Danny and or my kids. Your support makes videos like this one possible. Thanks for watching.
But at the very bottom is a land of undreamed of abundance, with enough food to feed the Earth's population 7 times over. There are rich ores and minerals carried by submarine trains to process stations on the coast. There is the water itself, to be drained from the sea and made precious rain, to turn desert lands into fertile lands. There will even be new areas for living and working, a whole new dimension of life for people of the future.
What is striking about the intellectual history of the technocrats is both how it echoes some of the notions to be found in the struggles for socialism, but also how it demonstrates that capitalist development really does produce what I would call a bourgeois drive for self-transcendence. In fact, given the brilliance of the technocratic movement, the question is, why did only the right wing gain real influence and power? Why was the left technocratic approach to overcoming capitalism and addressing the misery caused by the Great Depression superseded by the New Deal and the welfare state? There are particular empirical and historical reasons, undoubtedly, but there's also a more general answer that we can arrive at purely deductively. In his Grundrisse, Karl Marx argued that capitalism was driven by a contradiction between the foundation of capitalist production and the results of that production. He claimed as capital absorbed workers into itself in mass numbers, it created a more and more complicated division of labor. It developed more and more machines at each step in the process, and as each step was simplified. As the number of machines grew, as more and more was automated, there came a point when, quote, the theft of alien labor time on which the present wealth is based appears a miserable foundation in the face of this new one, created by large-scale industry itself. That is, the workers were to be split off from the productive process, becoming not so much workers, but caretakers and watchmen of the machines. According to Marx, eventually, the very foundation of capitalist production would be undermined as the labor value embodied in commodities would evaporate, or at least fail to grow sufficiently. Quote, on the one side, then, capitalism calls to life all the powers of science and of nature in order to make the creation of wealth independent, relatively, of the labor time employed on it. On the other side, it wants to use labor time as a measuring rod for the giant social force thereby created, and to confine them within the limits required to maintain the already created value as value. Forces of production and social relations, two different sides of the development of the social individual, appear to capital as mere means, and are merely means for it to produce on its limited foundation. End quote. These lines, when considered while holding the ambition and dreams of the 20th century technocrats in mind, seem prophetic. Reading them, you can almost taste the process of self-transcendence that is inherent to capitalist production. After all, according to Mumford and many others, capitalism had already created conditions of abundance, already created a situation wherein the working class could step away from the factory, from the office, from the fields, and watch as the capitalist machines transform nature into not just commodities for our consumption, but into the freedom we needed as we developed our intellects, our aesthetic sense, our imaginations, as we reached for the sky. And yet, later on in the Grundrisse, Marx points out why capital won't deliver this utopia all on its own. Marx points out why the technocrats never managed to create their new world. He wrote, quote, capital values perpetuate themselves by reproduction. The products which compose a capital are consumed just like any others, but their value, at the same time as it is destroyed by consumption, is reproduced in other materials or in the same one. Exchange and a system of exchanges, and included in that, the transformation into money as an independent value, appears as a condition and barrier for the reproduction of capital. Put in other words, the maintenance and reproduction of the wondrous machines that the technocrats rely upon in order to realize their dreams, in order to create new technologies, the abundance that they want to distribute, based on needs as measured in units of energy, rely upon the mediating circuit of exchange, as it is determined by labor time, in order to maintain themselves. That is, in order to maintain the productive forces of society, it appears to be necessary to maintain the social relations that reproduce them. To understand this through our popular imagination, consider what Slavoj Žižek once observed about the now classic film, The Matrix. At the end of the film, Neon addresses people still caught in the Matrix as a savior who will teach them how to liberate themselves from the constraints of the Matrix. They'll be able to break the physical laws, bend metals, fly in the air. However, the problem is that all these miracles are possible only if we remain within the VR sustained by the Matrix and merely bend or change its rules. Our real status is still that of the slaves of the Matrix. In her book, Small Gods, Alex notices that the promise of freedom to be found in science fiction films relies on a faith in technology. Further, the technologies, and therefore the terms of freedom, differ depending on when and where they are imagined. Our techno-utopias are determined by history, and our imaginations must submit to the technological forces that make our dreams possible. Put differently, it is the Megamachine that has produced visions of proletarian revolution, decentralized networks of cooperation, and technocratic management. But we may need something more than a machine to actualize our fantasies, and inevitably ruin them in the process. Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.